Face with Charlene Benedict.
Hello there, very good evening. Welcome to another edition of Face to Face. There has been much discussion, of course, in Sri Lanka's political arena regarding the rise of the National People's Power Movement, especially with the leader of the NPP taking a foreign tour to India, one of the first extended invitations from a foreign country to the NPP. The NPP was seen travelling several other countries, but there was a whole hue and cry about the visit of the leader of the NPP, Anurakumara Dissanayake, to India. Many people were curious as to what was discussed, maybe stemming from a certain amount from the anti-India rhetoric that the JVP was associated with maybe 20 to 30 years ago. But to discuss these matters and, of course, the economic plan that the Jatika Jana Balawegaya has for the future of Sri Lanka, we've got none other than a member of the Economic Council of the NPP, Dr. Harshana Suriyapperuma, joining us on our program today. Thank you very much, Dr. Suriyapperuma, for joining us on our program. He is not just only an Economic Council member of the NPP, he is also the Chief Operating Officer and Director of a major investment holding company in Sri Lanka, so no stranger to the corporate world. So, first question, the NPP is understood to be at least a communist Lenin party, and that's the majority party or the main party, if you will, in the NPP. Before I get into the economic policy matters, which I know is your cup of tea, I'd just like to get this off my back because there is a lot of clout that is surrounding the NPP right now, and most of those clouds are associated with the JVP, their history of being a communist Lenin party, but even the leader of the NPP has come out and said, well, you know, we're no longer that. But then we've seen leaders of political parties coming out and making statements that are just blatantly false. They might say it convincingly. I'm not saying that Anurakumara Dissanayake is lying, but I'm just saying that they might be very convincing, but it is all a lie. Now, you, on the other hand, well, a distinguished member of the corporate world, people look up to you, they trust in your economic judgment. How do you distinguish the JVP's past from the NPP that is there right now?
Thank you very much once again for having me. I would rather approach the question slightly differently instead of putting the whole weight into one side of it to request to look at as NPP as a whole.
Okay.
And the combination of individuals who are contributing to make the party and the alliance stronger is the fundamental of this entire equation.
Okay.
And the diverse backgrounds where individuals are coming into this equation is the first benchmark to understand that it is not the past, it is the future, it is the present, the composition of the present and the way how we are building up for it to get into the future.
Okay.
So I think there's a distinct difference between the individuals that are involved. As any movement, there are people who will be driving the political front of it, there will be individuals who will be driving the policy front of it, there will be intellects and professionals who will be contributing to the policy framework of it likewise. So now it is much broader alliance, but obviously with the experience and the background of people who are combining these efforts to take the next step for the country to move forward. I think that is the distinct difference between the past and the present and the way forward that we are planning to go ahead.
Well, the NPP again, as a political party, like you quite rightly said, is a collection of people. And now there is, of course, an attempt from your opponents to equate the JVP, or the NPP in this case, to Viatmaga and the SLPP, because let's not mix facts here. There was a wave that was created for the SLPP to come into power, and also there are those who argue that now there is a wave for the NPP, and some of those same people who argue that there's a wave for the NPP say that this wave is similar to the wave that brought in the SLPP into power, and therefore the people should be wary when they try to kind of go with the flow. How would you respond to that?
Given the circumstances that people have gone through, in a way, we can't blame the people for a perception of that nature.
Okay.
But I suppose a distinct difference between the past and this scenario is the movement or other organizations supporting the previous uprising governments, upcoming governments,
Yes.
they were sidelines of the main parties.
Okay.
Whereas as far as NPP is concerned, these individuals and parties who are contributing to it is part of the main organization itself. In the previous scenario, they were able to dislodge those people and movements who supported the party to come into power because those fragments or for those sections were not part of the main party itself. Whereas in the current scenario, I'm sure there are a lot of lessons to be learned from them. That is why it is the party itself, it is the collection of individuals itself making the NPP as an organization.
So you all identify as the National People's Power Movement.
Correct.
Whereas in the past, for example, the Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna, there was a distinct difference between the Viatmaga movement and the SLPP. You can't go address a member of the Viatmaga movement and call him a member of the SLPP. Is that the main distinction that there is?
That's one way to look. That's one very clear way to look at it.
Okay.
Going forward.
So are there any other distinctions also?
Because the reason is the individuals who have been made use for people to get into power was subsequently left out in the process.
Exactly.
Otherwise, if you look at some of the policies and procedures and the manifestos that they came out with, there are a lot of good content on it.
Exactly.
However, those individuals who prepared them were blatantly sidelined once they come into power. So to overcome those challenges, that's why it is much more organized structure with much more discipline in the process, where the parties, the individuals and the collaborations, movements, whoever you are supporting is part of the main core organization itself.
Right.
So anyone who's contributing was brought into the organization, their ideas were embraced, their objections were considered, and then created the final outcome to move forward. I would look at it that way.
Okay, so moving forward now, the NPP has not still put out their policy document, and I do understand why. This is a very tightly contested election. We are just a few months away from the election. If you kind of look at it, somewhere around September, between September and October is when the election should be held. We're in the month of February. I haven't quite done the calculation, but March, April, May, June, July, August, it's about 6 months away. But still, I do understand the importance of holding back the main content. But as far as the policies of the NPP goes, with regard to the economy of Sri Lanka, there are people who are skeptic about the policies of the NPP, probably liking them to maybe communist policies, protectionist policies, policies that wouldn't allow Sri Lanka to open up and connect to the rest of the world, not allowing, which is one of the main reasons why we're in this mess today. So when a distinguished member of the corporate world such as yourselves comes and vouches for the NPP, like you said before, do you think you will have a say in what the NPP does once they come into power, or if they come into power?
Very good way to look at it. One angle to look at is there can be labels assigned or associated with these organizations or parties in the past, but it has been a very progressive movement over the recent years, or I would rather call it during the last many years. With the likings of people, many things have been taken into consideration to decide the way forward, and the people who are walking in from the corporate backgrounds or from the other professional backgrounds, their ideas have been considered to develop for example, the economic policies that are to be considered. It's not an overnight document or something that we prepare. It is a long thought of process that it is going to be manifesting at the end of the day. So those workings are ongoing, and a substantial part of it is completed. It is not just to capitalize on the opportunity that the current situation is bringing about, but looking at the country as a whole and the economy as a whole. What are the things that we need to do actually to implement, if at all differently, to ensure the progress of the country to the level that the people are or the citizens are looking forward to. For example, it is the ambition of the NPP to make sure the future when it comes to economic development is in partnership with the private sector. It is clearly distinguished the intention of the government or in a former government the role of the government is not to get into business as a primary focus.
So you would follow the concept that government has no business being in business?
I would rather look at it slightly differently.
Okay.
Majority, I would say, of the business activities is belonging to the private sector. But there can be areas where the government need to engage with the private sector in hand.
Private-public partnerships.
Similarly. And then there can be another avenues where private sector, public sector, and people also playing a role in some of these operations. For example, the cooperative society arrangements where necessary, and there can be other arrangements where new concepts can be created at the end of the day, depending on the requirements. And as I said at the beginning, it is the reliance on the private sector as the growth engine of the country to take the country move forward. Government is not to stand on their way, but to facilitate the requirements of the private sector. If you look at some of the examples as of now, during last many decades, private sector is deprived of the economic democracy that they truly deserve for them to thrive and shine to their true potential.
There is no fostering of competition, many favorations, many tax benefits. I think that's quite blatant.
Very correct. So that is why I mentioned it is about the economic democracy provided to the private sector to truly come up and shine to their true potential. So instead of deal-based culture, a merit-based culture to identify organizations, instead of having unsolicited proposals, tenders, etc., to have transparency, to bring governance into the, it is currently or during last many years, it is only limited to talking. But here it is more about implementation of them. And if you look at the credibility of some of the people who are getting involved with us, instead of talking about many, let me take myself as an example. World Bank had doing business ranking for various segments in the country to identify, particularly to give some indication to foreign investors, why should a particular nation to be selected for investment purposes. I handle the protection of minority investors under the category, under the broader category. And the Sri Lanka's country ranking was 73 when I took over. Within 5 years, it was brought to the rank of 28 in the world. We are ahead of USA as well. Only few knows about the fact. This is an indication that it is about the implementation. We have enormous amount of acts, laws, bylaws, rules available in the country, but it boils down to implementation. We are trying to introduce more and more rules to close holes that mouse can escape, where there are gaping holes that buses can drive through available in the legislation if you look at some of the acts. So some of these boils down to corruption at policy level. So typically we tend to identify corruption is something that takes place at the time of implementation, but whereas many in many of the cases we have noted why some of the developing countries in the world are deprived in some of the opportunities and why they are stuck in those places as of now without being able to move is because policy level corruption due to incompetency issues or due to politicization of some of the organization who makes some of the policies. A classic example is the power sector. The Ceylon Electricity Board is currently being challenged as to what needs to be done, but many sometimes turned a blind eye to the fact that government has given a policy to them to work within. So the policy of the government sometimes has not taken into consideration the true needs of the country in terms of the power generation, in terms of power distribution, you name it inside that one. So similarly, there are many other policies that government has made the policy without adequate consultation, without opening up these documents to public for to provide observations and recommendations.
Now, since you brought up, Doctor, the Ceylon Electricity Board, now the JVP is also, and the NPP is closely associated with trade unions.
Correct.
Right. Now, and at the CEB, when reforms are proposed, you see trade unions rising up. The Ports Authority, you see trade unions rising up. So there are those who believe that sometimes these trade unions themselves, for their own benefit, because at the end of the day, trade unions are not incorporated or formed for the benefit of the general public or for the benefit of that sector. That's for their own benefit, their rights, their employment benefits. And for example, at the CEB, there was a loan scheme that was handed out to all CEB employees where they were given loans at very, very concessionary interest rates. They had to only pay 1/3 of the interest on the loans that they took out of this CEB loan scheme. And guess who paid the remaining 2/3 for their loans? The interest on their loans, 2/3 of it was paid by both you, I, and probably Dr. yourself as well. So when it comes to these matters, what is the plan of the NPP on dealing with these trade unions? Because it's blatantly clear that although they come on screen time and time again and scream and shout and say, we're doing this for the people, no, they're doing this for themselves. And there's quite a sizable amount of representation of the NPP in these trade unions as well. So how do you reconcile that?
Sure. So there are two ways to look at it. What has brought some of these organizations or organized movements to stand up for their rights is the policy makers blatantly ignoring them, the mere presence of them when some of the policy decisions are made. Some of the policy decisions are made. So they need a hearing for some of their concerns. But the example that you brought in terms of, for example, loans that were given at concession, etc. I'm sure there are many areas that we can relook at it, we can learn from them, and we can going forward improve the approach to matters of this nature. But as I said, at one point someone has made that policy to go ahead on that basis.
To allow them to.
To allow them to proceed.
But one of the biggest issues with the state-owned enterprises is how it's managed. Because it's managed by a separate board of directors. They are the ones who make the decisions. The so-called people are not even shareholders of it, although we say it is the people's assets, it's a national asset, it's run by the government. But people are not shareholders of it. It's exclusively run by this board of directors who are more often than not appointed by politicians. They are political appointees, and in the end, they draw out much of the benefits from it. For example, legal fees of the CEB amounts in the millions, hundreds of millions. Now, this money does not come out of the pockets of the directors or the chairman of the CEB. It comes out of the pockets of poor people in Sri Lanka, both you and I, and that's how they fund these. So regarding the management of these state-owned enterprises, I believe there is a restructuring drive for state-owned enterprises, quite a complicated maneuver, one of which we couldn't quite explain to the general public right now. But how does the NPP plan on grappling with this management issue?
We can't ignore the elephant in the room, as you said very correctly. SO is a matter that any government needs to deal with going forward. So the real issue is, as many have pointed out, is not the SOE itself. It is of the way how SOEs are managed.
Okay.
They have been used by politicians over and over and over to basically give appointments and place people for employment purposes as kickbacks for people who have supported them during the process. So due to various reasons of this nature in one side, the overhead structures of those organizations has grown into immense unbearable proportions. That's one angle. Then the second angle is, even though those are state-owned enterprises, they are supposed to be minimum levels of interference from the politicians and political hierarchy. They have been interfered on a day in and day out basis, from smallest transactions to the largest transactions, because these organizations deal with large amounts of money when it comes to contracts and tenders and
But if you ask the political authority, they would just completely pass over the blame to the board of directors and say that we are not involved in this in these decision-making processes.
That's a good point. So when the board of directors are taking independent decisions in the best interest of the organization and in the country, we can see what happened at SLT just few weeks back.
The chairman.
The members of the board were removed and replaced. They were brought in just few months back to do the right thing. So when these boards are trying to do the right thing in the best interest of the organization, they are being replaced by people who will say yes sir to any of those requests from the politicians. So as people, we need to make a call. Is this the future that we want to move forward towards to say yes sir to all the requests of the politicians when it comes to organization?
But then in the case of the CEB, when the directors have made all the wrong decisions, there were directors in the past who gifted themselves the vehicle that was allotted to them by the CEB at the end of their tenure upon retirement. And when queried towards the end, when at least this practice was revealed to the general public, when questioned, their response was, no, it has been a tradition, a practice, where the retiring board members would get their vehicles as maybe a take-home benefit. So these decisions that have been taken, of course, are wrong decisions, not in the interest of the country, not in the interest of the CEB, not in the interest of that sector. So when those kind of decisions are taken, do you believe that the government or the political hierarchy should have a say in stopping them? How is this? How are we going to balance the power in SOEs?
Sure. So it is the approach and the demonstration by example at the highest level. When outgoing presidents of the country are being taken care of with a manner, with allocating large sums of money from the government budget that should have gone to the benefit of the people, while some of those presidents are still serving in the parliament, people take from those examples. If it is allowed at the highest level, and by no means I'm not trying to justify that one, so these practices might have evolved and spilled over into the other organizations as well. That is why we need a different approach, a different set of people to look at matters differently, to take a clean sheet and understand what is in the best interest of the organization, and what is in the best interest of the public that we need to do, at least going forward. So many things in the past that we may not be able to correct, but it's a choice that we have as a people and as citizens to make the right choice, at least going forward. Do we need the same old practice, or do we need to have a different practice? Can the same person who conducted the previous practice say, no, at least going forward I'm not going to do this,
I'm going to change?
So that after 70 years of listening to the same story, I suppose that is why I said it's a movement. People are galvanizing to walk towards a solution, or towards a group of people that might do something different. I suppose that is where NPP has become a very strong alternative to give the choice to the people to make that right choice at the right time.
But Dr. time and time again, since we're in the final few minutes of the program, time and time again we've seen that professionals, experts, corporate leaders come, they back a party, they back a candidate, they support that party, and the moment that party comes into power, it is only the representatives of those parties that make it to parliament, maybe provincial councils or local government bodies at times. Those are the people who finally make the decisions, and the corporate leaders, the professionals, the experts in the field are completely disregarded. So that being the practice in Sri Lanka, a logical man would look at this and say, well, then the professionals, experts and corporate leaders should also contest, so that they are in parliament, so they can be held personally liable for the decisions that they make. So maybe at the next general election, which according to the president will be held next year, are you willing to contest the general election and represent the people?
Sure. Let me approach the question in two ways. As I said, by action it was demonstrated. People who supported the NPP to get into where it is. Dr. Harini was brought into the parliament, even though she was not from the mainstream political side of it with the rest of the party members. So that is an example to showcase. It is not only people who supported, but the professionals, being a lady to represent in the highest place in Sri Lanka, she was brought into the parliament. That's why I said at the beginning, it is about demonstrating by doing it, not just by saying it. So the second part of the question, yes, if there are opportunities, all depends on the outcome of the presidential election, and I'm sure people are quite convinced as the way which direction they should go, and I'm sure as a party we are also convinced of the same outcome, and if happens to the way how we all are expecting, I'm sure myself and many others who are supporting will get into the stage subsequently when the elections are called. So that's a situation to be checked in time to come, but I'm sure it's hopeful. And as a party, we are willing to give opportunities to many other. That's not a decision as an individual for myself, but it's a collective decision for the party to make. Sure.
Well, of course, all of these statements that you are making is going on record. This will be online for the foreseeable future. And you being a man of reputation, of course, need to protect that reputation. So are you certain that the same fate that befell Sri Lanka once professionals came out and supported the SLPP at a time back in 2019, are you sure Sri Lanka will not face the same fate if the popularity, at least of the NPP, continues to grow and eventually are elected into power?
The dependency of outcomes of matters of that nature is, I would say, people have learned so many lessons based on what happened in the recent past. So because of that, I'm quite certain as a party, the decision makers of the party will make the right choice to bring the right people to the right place.
And you would have said that.
As I said, the party has demonstrated by bringing a professional into the parliament. So that is a classic example to vouch the way how we conduct ourselves going into the future.
Thank you very much, Dr. Harshana Suriyapperuma, member of the Economic Council of the NPP. Of course, I know that your cup of tea is economics and how Sri Lanka can get out this Economic Council, but you obviously quite aptly answered political questions of a very serious political nature as well. So thank you very much for joining us on our program and clarifying these matters, of course, to the general public of Sri Lanka. We hope to see you on many more appearances also on this show and many others on our sister networks as well. Thank you very much to all our viewers out there for tuning in to another episode of Face to Face. Of course, as I remind our viewers every time at the conclusion of every program, the future of Sri Lanka is in your hands, the future of your children, the Sri Lanka that you leave for the next generations that are to come in the centuries that are to come here in Sri Lanka is in your hands, and it's up to you to make an informed decision, and it's our responsibility to keep you informed. We will continue to do just that. Thank you very much for watching. Take care and God bless.